The legislation seems a little more open, a little less defined than it is for the Irish Language Commissioner. Is that fair to say?
I've always said that they're not mirror images of each other. And they shouldn't be viewed. Just because you've got the same title does not mean you're exactly in the same place or same powers or same things to be done. But that is, I wouldn't necessarily be critical of that, because I would say in the past there's actually been a bit too much of, oh, this is what we've done for Irish, we'll just do the same for yous. And it's like, well, that's not actually what we need now. Right now, we need something different. We need some flex. So to take account of where people are at, what they want and need, I think is actually better. I don't think what I've got is perfect, but I take the approach of, I've taken the job, I've got the tools I'm given, I'm going to do the best job I can with those tools.
It's interesting, I've spoken to the Irish Language Commissioner, Paul Deeds, and he has described this legislation as not in any way what Irish language campaigners campaign for, but he did describe it in some ways as genius. He did describe it as very, very, there was something very intelligent around it. Would you agree with that?
There was thought went into it. It was, now granted, it's any political negotiation is a bit of a sausage machine in Northern Ireland, and it's this is the sausage that came out over the sausages that came out the other end of it. So it is, but it's basically there is an infrastructure that has been created. There's a variety of powers, and it gives something new. And so with every time we get something new, that represents a new opportunity to make something of.
Why did you want this job?
You sort of listed my political career earlier on. One of my first jobs was working for the Ulster Scots Heritage Council, the Hairskip Council, and it was because that deeply interested me. I've actually, for all my years in politics, I've actually took more joy in any work I've done culturally rather than politically. Now, I did enjoy my time, but I always got more value out of it just personally. For me, there's a personal motivation, and I would describe it as there was an identity that was talked of in my family. There was a cultural wealth in my family that the system completely and utterly ignored. And I have, well, anger is maybe too much of a word, but basically I want that, that was wrong and I want that righted. You take my great-grandfather, I'm actually his namesake, I'm known by my second name, John, North Antrim. Only time he left North Antrim was to fight World War I, and after that he didn't really decide to go anywhere. He was a full-blown monoglot Ulster Scots speaker. When I was taken to visit him, I was first-generation town, Coleraine. When I was taken to visit him, I had significant difficulty understanding him. And my dad would tell me what my great-granddad was saying to me. I was never explained to me or outlined to me. He was an Ulster Scots speaker. That's why I couldn't understand him. In my entire education system, at home, one of the identities we would use as a family was Ulster Scots. I went through an education system that never used the word except twice in the entire time I was in the education system. Once was my P7 teacher mentioned it. Once my history teacher mentioned it in secondary school. That was the only mention of it. The one comment I can even think of towards the language was a derisory comment by the Latin teacher that people in a hockle speak funny. So there is a thing of, there was a wealth and an identity that we recognised that was recognised nowhere else. There was a linguistic wealth in my family that I was given no access to. And the one term I love from human rights documents is the term cultural wealth. So that was a wealth that was denied. It was also a wealth that, for various reasons and by various people were told was worthless and isn't worthless. And it's a wealth that I want people to have access to in its full form, not just the language, the broader culture and heritage as well.
There's so many questions coming from what you've just said that I will struggle to remember them all. But one of the things that I suppose this often happens, one of the questions I have at the end, I'm going to have to bring it forward. Because until 1998, the people who were responsible for the education system, and, one way or the other, I mean, I acknowledge it was direct rule, but I mean, we did have the Northern Ireland Civil Service. They were, most of whom were Ulster Protestant Unionists, of Ulster Scots stock. So I mean, that one's, I mean, not recognising Ulster Scots either linguistically or culturally. I mean, that's one on Northern Ireland.
Yes, absolutely. There's a story that he's long dead now, the Reverend Brett Ingram. He was one of the founder members of the Ulster Society, which did some cultural work in the 80s and 90s and early 90s. In terms of the ruling segment, well, yes, firstly it was 1972 was direct rule, people flying in and out, how much they were actually governing the place and all the rest of it. And there was also, to be in defence of the civil service, they were trying to stop the country coming apart at the seams. You know, they were one of the institutions which thankfully helped achieve that. So you can understand why they weren't always on point or always fully focused on where they should be. Then there's other things like they followed the trends at the time. But last time the curriculum was written, it was all, please avoid specificity. The more freedom you give people, the better. That's what they did. And then you end up with large gaps. And now when we've done a review, everybody's going, well, we don't want complete specificity, but we don't want nothing either. You know, so it's one of those ones. So things can go wrong in general policy making. But I think in terms of how Northern Ireland was governed, the story that Brett Ingram tells probably sums it up. Those in power purely invested in the institutions. He wanted to organise a celebratory event, a commemorative event in 1962 to mark the Third Home Rule crisis and the Larne gun running. You know, huge historical event, one of the formative events ultimately for Northern Ireland, etc. And he went to see the minister about this, and the minister's comment to him was, "Why are you worrying about these things? We run this place." They just saw all power and influence as political. If you controlled the political institutions, that was it. You didn't have to worry about anything broadly or more, your societal trends and all the rest of it. You were in control. As long as you control, nothing to worry about. And within a decade, they had lost that control. So there was no legacy there. There was no means of maintaining things once that power had gone.
One of the other things that's just come up from what I have said, I'm very tempted to point out that, I mean, we're talking about the way people speak in some stages, and we're going to talk about the Ulster-British tradition as well, but I've always struck, if you listen to the Unionist leaders of the 1950s and 1960s, I mean, they have clipped English-style educated accents. I realise that that's the accent they always had. I mean, I've met people born and bred here who have that kind of accent to this very day. Of course, I understand that. Just in terms of your role in terms of the Ulster Scots language, you mentioned there was a degree of promotion there. I think that's the word you used. I mean, how is that distinguished from the Ulster Scots Agency?
Well, two things. They have the either, well, depending on your perspective, they have the advantage or curse of having money to give out, which is, I think it's a double-edged sword. You know, it's if you've money to give out, somebody in Northern Ireland is going to come and talk to you, but then the number of people that fall out with you if you don't give them money is also large as well. There is the agency. Firstly, it's a cross-border institution. It's not limited to Northern Ireland. It has a funding role that I do not have. And then it's essentially the scale of resources it has, etc. It has not been in a position to do the policy role anywhere near as much as was wanted and need. You know, they're wanting need for out there. So this sort of fills that gap in terms of that. And also that there's the complaints role, which they do not have, which I will have.
I mean, and anyone who's listening to this, I will get onto the Ulster-British stuff. I will. I promised to get that.
Yeah, I do consciously go around telling people it's already ran into, it's like, oh, you're the Commissioner for Ulster Scots. Yes. And I'm going, no, and Ulster-British.
That's the shorthand
that
we see across every news website we have now. So, but I acknowledge I will get into that.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I think, and this is my opinion, I last heard Ulster Scots in the wild around 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think, and I've heard stories like you. I remember I met an old man from Ballymena, and he used to work for the Forestry Commission, and people used to ask him about Ulster Scots, and he said, well, no, I'm actually don't speak Ulster Scots. People were saying, I thought that was Ulster Scots. He said, well, part of my job was to translate for people who worked in the Forestry Commission. And surely that's a problem, because the last person that I heard speaking Ulster Scots, what I considered Ulster Scots, was somewhere near Kirkcudbright. and we both know that Ulster Scots has retreated from the Ards spectacularly.
Yes, the whole issue of suburbanisation there, and people moving out from Belfast. Yeah,
and the accent has changed and everything. Now that's not across the board, of course. And that's a problem, because when I was asking people, what should I ask this guy? What should I ask this guy? People from, frankly, a unionist background, Protestant background, said, I don't think this is a language. You know what I mean? So that's a question that you're going to have to just deal with and forever deal with and just snap down on.
It's because it is recognised as such, and that's how it's going to be treated. If someone wants to wander into that cul-de-sac again, fine, knock yourselves out. Ulster Scots is recognised as a language. It's going to be treated as a language. We're going to do the language planning for it. We're going to make it all it can be.
But do you not think, I think the point I'm trying to take is, I'm trying to ask you is because people, when they're presented, people said, well, there's 12 words. Do you use those 12 words? There you're speaking Ulster Scots. And I'm not knocking that as a tactic. But people then, if they heard a recording of someone, perhaps in the past, maybe not in the past, because the problem is, I'm sure, and my perception is that if I headed up today to parts of rural Antrim, the people mightn't open up to me and speak in Ulster Scots.
It's always been described as the language of the hearth and home. It's for your friends and family. I can remember one time going to Portavogie, standing in a queue, and the shop assistant, using Ulster Scots to the person in front of me. And whenever I came up and paid, I was a stranger, and she spoke English. There was no use of Ulster Scots at all. But the person before me, who was a local, she used Ulster Scots. So you get that. And I can remember there's people I know and would have talked to down in the language revival that they would have spoke broader Ulster Scots. But the minute a microphone appeared, even some of the broadest speakers I've ever heard, would tidy up their language a wee bit. Because there was a microphone in the room. So you run it. There is this thing of, because people have been told it's worthless, you then run into a fear of use.
And that perhaps would be an explanation as to why people hear Ulster Scots themed programmes in the media and they say, that's not an Ulster Scots.
Well, this is what the Catalans have a lovely phrase. I keep crediting the Catalans, and I'm pretty sure it's them. But if I'm wrong and it should be somebody else, then forgive me. They talked, whenever they were beginning the revival of the Catalan language, they talked of it being a half-remembered language. And that's essentially what it is. So no one knows all of Ulster Scots. Because you'll have known the Ulster Scots that's left in your part of County Antrim, your part of County Down, of your part of East Donegal. We all have our half memory of it. Now, if we all put our memories together, it'll be an even better place. Then could be work on a corpus of when it was written down, all the different spellings, and that will add to it even more. So at this stage, I picked up a book. There was a good book, just latest edition of Yarns with New Ulster Scots writing, and I was reading it, and I was going through it, and there was actually somebody had used a word, and it was an English word, and I was going, but there's a good Ulster Scots word for that. Now, it was good. It was good writing, but it was also conscious. It was a person who was younger than me. I'm now over 50, and so it reinforced to me what they've heard is less than what I heard, and what my dad heard was less than what my grandfather had heard, and so on. So there is a job of reclamation and repair to be done to it.
Reclamation,
and this is the other thing. You've this thing called leach and braid, light or broad. And if it's light, people go, then it's not real language. And if it's as fullest and broadest as we can make it, then they go, we're making it up. There's sometimes when you're dealing with critics, they're going to find a way to have a go. And it's if we decide where it needs to go, if we get the plans to where it go, well, that's where we're going. Let those who want to criticise. We know where we're going, what we need to deliver.